y'all. Welcome back to Between a Hot Mess and a Therapist, your not so typical self-help podcast for high responsibility helpers who are tired of pretending they are fine. I'm your host, Shauna Lovin, a seasoned therapist, Texas LPC supervisor, 3-5 emotional projector, and a total tree-hugging auntie rebel who believes healing can be natural. Of course, with compassion and a little cussing. If you're watching on YouTube, listening in your car, hiding in the bathroom at work, or staring at your ceiling at 2 a.m., baby, I already know what kind of week you're having. So grab your favorite beverage, get comfy, and let's dive in. I remember sitting in a meeting one day where everybody is talking in this polished little professional sentences. And I had to work very hard to not let my face tell the actual truth. You know the kind of truth I'm talking about. Somebody says a lot of words and none of it makes sense or it's even useful. Somebody else nods like, oh, that's great insight. And everybody's acting like this form matters more than the human being that's sitting right there in front of us. And I could feel this hot, specific, irritating climb up my back and neck. The kind that says, girl, if one more underseasoned person with a little title explains reality to me, like I haven't been in the trenches and actually doing this work, I'm going to need a minute. The irritation was not new, but that day it got super honest because what was really happening wasn't just annoyance. It was the slow, uncomfortable realization that I had outgrown the room before I had the language for what that meant. Not the whole profession, not the heart at work itself, not the clients, not the part where people were hurting and needed somebody real with them. I never outgrew that. What I outgrew was the performance of expertise from people who had less range than they thought, less imagination than what work actually required, and less lived leadership and experience than the people they are actually supervising. Okay, that was a lot. And I probably said some quiet stuff out loud, but hey, that's why we're here. There comes a point for a lot of therapists, healers, and helping professionals where you realize the field taught you some things, yes, but it's also taught you to over-respect containers that were never meant to evolve to begin with. It taught you how to document, how to comply, how to sound smart, and how to stay inside the lines, how to not get used, how to mirror the right language, how to be palatable, how to be useful inside systems that are often exhausting, outdated, and not nearly as innovative as they think they fucking are. What it does not always teach you was how to think beyond the walls, the box, build something of your own, trust your own read, or stay human while doing all of that. That is where the gap is. That's where a lot of mid-career identity crisis rupture actually starts. Because eventually you sat with enough people, survived enough systems, and seen enough behind the scenes nonsense and shit, and you've developed enough discernment to recognize when people above you are not actually wiser, just more institutionally endorsed. And that can mess with your head if you are trained to equate authority with depth. You look around one day and you realize I have more real world understanding than someone or some of these people who have shaped my career. I've had more nuance than the frameworks that was handed to us. I have more vision than the lanes I was told to stay in. And now I'm supposed to pretend that shrinking is professionalism? Fuck no. No, ma'am. We are not doing that. That does not make you arrogant. It makes you awake. And let's be careful here, because this is not a cheap little rebellion against standard ethics and actually clinical rigor. This is not, I know better than everyone else, and I reject all structures because I'm special. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a very particular disillusionment that happens when you are still devoted to real care, still serious about your work, still willing to learn, but you can no longer pretend the profession as it currently operates has arranged to hold all of you and who you are now. That is different. And it's lonely in a way people don't always understand. Because once you hit that point somewhere, you feel weirdly homeless inside that very field that taught you how to survive. You still speak the language, you still know the codes, you still carry the license, the training, the discipline, the responsibility. Yeah. But internally, something has shifted. You can't unknow what you know. You can't go back to thinking the institution is a whole source of wisdom. You can't keep kneeling at the altar for people who mistake conviction for mastery. That's where the anti-therapist energy comes in. And it's not just therapist, but it's anti-helper. We'll call it that. It's not anti-healing. It's not anti-depth. It's not anti-care. It's anti-flatness. It's anti-pretend expertise. It's the boring professional myth that stays if you are credentialed, supervised, and well-spoken. And you must always be expansive, effective, and honest. Baby, absolutely fucking not. Some people are carrying titles where insight should be. And for people who are listening, who have had the realization and then immediately felt guilt about it, let me save you some spiraling. This is not bitterness. This is not a non-compliance for sport. This is not you getting difficult because you can't handle the structure. This is what happens when your capacity outgrows your conditioning and your nervous system starts rejecting spaces that require self-minimization to stay appropriate. That shows up in the body before it shows up on your resume. It shows up in a flatness when you talk about work you used to care a lot about. It shows up as irritation around bureaucracy once tolerated. It shows up as a visceral resistance to endless case notes, stale leadership, fake collaboration, and sitting through another training where nobody says anything you didn't learn the hard way 5-10 years ago. It shows up as a fantasy, not always quitting the profession, but practicing differently, living differently, making money differently, telling the truth more directly, creating work that actually reflects your intelligence instead of tiny approved slice. That kind of tension can scramble a person, especially if you've been heavily identified with being a therapist, a clinician, a helper, a first responder, an attorney, a teacher, whatever. Because when the role stops fitting cleanly, you don't question the job. You question yourself. You wonder whether you're losing your commitment, losing your heart, losing discipline, or losing gratitude. But because sometimes what you're actually losing is your tolerance for professional self-abandonment and honestly, your tolerance for just bullshit. And that's the very thing. I know for me, the deeper shift was not about the counseling world or the corporate life feeling too cramped. It was about recognizing I had internalized this belief of legitimacy only to live in certain containers. That if something wasn't named the right way, housed in the right way, or supervised in the right way, or blessed by the right institution, then it counted less. And meanwhile, I was out here developing real skill, real discernment, real entrepreneurial muscles, real human understanding in the wild through building, pivoting, experimenting, and learning what actually works and becoming more of a person in the process. And that matters. Learning human design, moving into travel planning, stepping into a family business doing custom t-shirt printing, all of that might look random to somebody that's not in my world and addicted to a linear career path or a linear story. But from inside, it wasn't random at all. It was the same deeper movement, refusing to live through a professional identity that holds all of my intelligence, refusing to lie that evolution only counts if it happens inside a clinical approved hallway, refusing stale fantasy that staying in one sanctioned box forever is the only respectable version of devotion. So for all y'all 40-year career folks and boomers, this is not what we're doing anymore. Sometimes the most honest thing a seasoned helper can do is to stop worshiping the original container. Your container has changed and shifted, and you need to change and shift with it. Not because it gave you nothing, because it gave you what it gave you. And now there's more to give somewhere else. A lot of helpers will hear this and be like, wait a minute. So you mean to tell me I need to quit my job and I need to just go travel the world and do whatever? No. This is the one for the ones who need to build quietly on those side competencies, the side curiosity, the side vision, the side businesses. Not because you're unserious about your work, but because you are starving because you are a multidimensional person. And I hate the term side hustle, of course, here, but it flattens something that's sacred, a little bit money-making hobby. Yeah, with a cute branding. That's cool. But this is not about a side hustle. This is something more that grows beside your original profession. And it could be a side something, a side anything. And it's the next honest expression of your intelligence, whatever that looks like. This is how you're transitioning from your current role to maybe a new role or something that's more you or something you do after you retire, whatever. This is the self that you were taught to trust. This is the person you're moving into because the field was too narrow to recognize this person. And that's where you're going. And yes, that can make other people feel uncomfortable as fucking hell because you are moving and growing. Because our systems are super predictable. Institutions are very legitimate. Professions like people who color inside the lines, and they call that maturity. The minute you become harder to categorize, you threaten the little fantasy that was there right away to be credible. The minute you stop over identifying with the label loses its power over you. And for people who built their security around that structure, your expansion can read like betrayal. Lord, let me tell you. But your life is not a loyalty program for outdated professional norms. Let's be grown as adults for a second. A license can be a tool. Training can be useful. Ethics matter. Discernment matters. Standards matter. But none of those things require you to become professionally embalmed. None of those things require you to cap your evolution to a point where the field stops knowing what to do with you. None of those things require you to keep pretending your richest intelligence only counts when it's translated into institutional approved language. And I think that's the one that most exhausting thing of mid-career helpers happens. It's the constant translation that happens. You know the old, but you also know the new. And then there's that in-between space. Taking what you know in your bones and sanding it down into words that the system can actually digest, making yourself smaller, tidier, more explainable, more linear, more conventional, easier for people to approve of. That kind of chronic editing wears down on the body. It creates a very specific fatigue because you're not just doing the work, you're managing your own expansion so it doesn't threaten the room that you're in. That is draining as hell. And eventually the body starts objecting. Less energy for performance, less appetite for pretending, more annoyance at the weak leadership, more clarity about where you're leaking life force, trying to stay professional and acceptable. That's not because you've become cynical. It may be because your system wants congruence more than compliance right now. That's the part I wish more people kind of understood. When you are a therapist, healer, helper, and then you start to pivot, broaden, build, and speak more boldly, it doesn't automatically mean that you've abandoned the field. Sometimes it means that they've finally stopped letting the field define the full parameter of the value. Sometimes it means that you're becoming more useful, not less. Because now you're bringing your whole lived intelligence experience instead of a sanitized version of you. So here's what the reframe is today. You don't have to choose between keeping your license and keeping your soul. You don't have to burn down your past to validate who you're becoming. You don't have to prove loyalty to stay professionally underexpressed. You are allowed to keep what's true, release what's stale, and build beyond what you originally trained to imagine. That's not inconsistency. That is a maturity with agency. And if you are in the season where your profession still fits on paper, but not at all in your body, I want you to say this. I want to say this gently and plainly. Maybe your discomfort is not a signal that you've lost your way. Maybe it's just a sign that your way got bigger than what the map that was actually given to you many years ago. That is not a crisis. That might be your life trying to become more honest. So maybe the question is no longer, how do I stay inside an identity correctly? Maybe the better question is, what have I become skilled enough, brave enough, and human enough to build now? Not to impress anybody, not to escape discomfort, not to collect shiny new labels, but to create a work life that actually respects depth, complexity, and the breadth of who you are now. Because some of y'all are not confused. You are crowded by roles, crowded by definitions, crowded by professional myths that once helped and now just take up fucking space. And the real relief you are craving may not come from trying harder to fit back into the old shape. It may come from admitting that old shapes were never meant to be your final form. That's what I mean. That's what I want to leave you with. Where are you still acting like the version of your professional identity is the holy place to be? Where are you still asking permission from people whose imagination is smaller than your lived experience? Where are you still translating yourself down just to stay liable? You don't need to become reckless. You don't need to become superior. You don't need to become a rebellion type person. But you may need to stop pretending that staying professional digestible is the same thing as being fully expressed. Those are not the same thing. And baby, if your body has started getting really tired every time you force that confusion, that is not dysfunction. Maybe that wisdom refusing to wear the same name tag just no longer fits. All right, my loves, that's another episode in the books, and I'm out. Now, I need you to go drink some water, touch some grass, get a sip of sunlight, take a pause, and stop acting like your nervous system is optional. And yes, you are basically a houseplant with complicated emotions. If you needed this today, tell me about it, tell me what landed, hit follow, and send this to the I'm fine friend who is absolutely not fine, and you know who I'm talking about. And if you want to work with me, everything you need is linked in the show notes because Auntie doesn't do energy sucking DMs. Okay, love you. Bye.